He is alive. He is alive. Friends and family, welcome to today's service. It's great to have you all here. If I was to ask you what the top 10 historical events throughout all of history were, I wonder what you'd say to me. The top 10 historical events of all time. Perhaps the discovery of fire. Who's glad we've got fire in the world today? I think I'm pretty glad about that. Most of us, if we're cooking and keeping warm. Who would say the compass? Who's glad that we've had the compass to navigate a way around at times? We've now got GPS, which is pretty good. The clock. Who would struggle to live without the clock, perhaps? Who wishes they didn't have a clock to live by? Okay, excellent. We can pursue that lifestyle. Maybe the beginning of agriculture and farming. The Iron Age in 1300 BC. The steam engine. Who remembers those days? Fantastic. Excellent. It's a touchy topic these days, but vaccinations, who's glad we've got them? Vaccinations, yeah, excellent. That's good. So am I. The discovery of electricity. I'm pretty happy about that. Most of us sitting here in air conditioning, I think, would attest to that. The landing of the moon. Oh, that's right, it didn't happen. Hang on. No, we weren't going to go there. The invention of antibiotics. I'm pretty happy about that as well. The telegraph. Who sent one of those, perhaps, in their time? Maybe not. Okay. The refrigerator. I do miss living out of an Todd's all over it. Top 10, number 1. It's often empty though, isn't it, Todd? That's the issue. That's fine. Flight. I don't know if you enjoy the idea of flight. The internet. Smartphones. Who's glad we've got smartphones? Top 10. Okay, excellent. There we go. Okay, later on. Top 10 moments in history. Things that have never happened before. Canberra beating Broncos at Suncorp Stadium last night. Well done, Chris. Well done, Chris. Second only to Jesus rising, probably. What are some key moments for you, friends? What are some key moments for you? I want you to consider in your lifetime, forget about human history, but in your lifetime, what are those life-changing, life-defining moments? Perhaps when you got married, when you had a child, maybe when you met Jesus. Those things that have indelibly impacted and altered your life forever. When we look at the Gospels, if you look at Paul's letters and writings, you see a moment in history where the grave is empty and a dead man has risen. A grave is empty and a dead man has risen. Now, graves were empty before. They were empty before, mostly for nefarious reasons. And there were also instances of dead people rising before. Jesus had, in fact, done this for others. But this event was different. This was Jesus himself, rising from the dead as the prophets foretold and as God the Father had ordained. Life would never be the same ever again for any of us. The grave is empty and he is risen. It was a key moment that was transformative for every individual who ever lived, whoever will live, for the whole of humanity. Friends, it's personal. It's personal. The resurrection of Jesus is personal. It's transformative for all civilizations and world orders, systems that govern us. It's political. And it's transformative for all of creation. It's elemental. The resurrection enshrined and enthrones Jesus as Lord of all for you and for me. Jesus is Lord, not Caesar, of the way we do life. Jesus is Lord over creation, over everything, forever. The grave is empty, he is risen. This was the age of resurrection. The age of resurrection. And this is the age that we're all living in now. The age of resurrection. Not the age of Gen Zs, postmodernism, globalization, artificial intelligence. Not the age of the Penrith Panthers, thank goodness, or social media conglomerates. It's the age of resurrection. And when I think of what key moments of history are, I think of God's story, his story. These 4 pillars, I think of creation itself being birthed at the time of the universe coming into existence. I think of the incarnation, Jesus himself, God himself coming into creation. I think of God of the resurrection, Jesus raising from the dead. And I think of God of the reclamation, when Jesus will return, friends, the final redemption for everything. We are living in the age of resurrection. The grave is empty. He is risen. You know, a number of years ago, and if you haven't seen this series, I encourage you to check it out. It's called The Christ Files. Has anyone ever heard of The Christ Files before? I believe it was a Channel 7 series in the day, or even ABC, The Christ Files. It's worth checking out. And this pastor, I think he was an Anglican minister, went round the community and interviewing different people. He talked to lots of scholars. It was basically a documentary which asked the question, who is Jesus? Not just the historical Jesus, but the risen Jesus. Did Jesus live and die? Was he crucified, which we commemorated on Friday? Yes. History attests to that. Most people, most non-Christians, identify with that truth, that Jesus died and he was crucified. The question that most people don't agree on, many people don't agree on, is did Jesus rise from the dead? For some, yes. For many, no. It's just a myth. This morning, where do you sit? What do you believe? A few biblical scholars, believe it or not, say that the resurrection, it actually doesn't matter or not whether it happened. Friends, that's nonsense. The resurrection is the cornerstone, the linchpin of our faith. Paul put it this way: if Christ had not been raised, then our faith is in vain. If Christ had not been raised, then our faith is in vain. If the resurrection did not happen, all we have is a man who did some incredible things and claimed some incredulous things that were never ultimately fulfilled. The beauty of John's gospel account is that he shows that the resurrection was and is not just an historical fact. John's account is the most comprehensive of all the Gospels in recording details and showing us proof of the resurrected Jesus. As we've shared in past weeks, as we've looked at the Gospel of John, there were 7 key miracles or signs that he focused upon. 7 days in terms of the Sabbath. And now when Jesus raises from the dead, what day is it? What day is it? The resurrection for Jesus, for John, is on the 8th day. It's the 8th wonder. It's the 8th incredible sign. It's the start of a new week, a new world order, a new eternal order. This was not the culmination of what had just become, what was. It wasn't just another cycle of what had been. This was something radically new. Resurrection, friends, shouts a new beginning. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Resurrection is not simply something that Jesus did, it is who he is. He is life eternal. The context of this story that was read by Evan just earlier was that the Jesus was crucified and the disciples, that they'd fled. Not the women, mind you, but the disciples fled. Jesus was buried in this tomb, Joseph's tomb, and quickly there was no time for the body to be prepared. The next day was the Sabbath, and on the Sabbath we don't do anything. So they couldn't do anything with the body. They couldn't go very far. And women followers themselves were preparing to go early in the morning to avoid attention. We had the privilege of being at the dawn service this morning, and it was a great space just to see the sunrise. But even earlier than that, the women set out towards the grave. In the wake of Jesus' crucifixion, the followers were shocked. They were devastated. They were confused. They were lost. They were grief-stricken. They were fearful. They were hiding. They were running. Many focused on self-preservation. And I wonder if you've ever felt like that in life. The enemies of Jesus, they were relieved. They felt that they were vindicated. They had a sense of smugness. Jesus was now dead. He was now taken care of. Their problems were over. And all of this picture reveals that no one was expecting Jesus. No one was expecting Jesus to rise again. Despite him having told the disciples numerous times, and in fact in Luke's account he told them 7 times that he would rise. No one expected him to die, mind you, his followers didn't. No one expected him to passively comply with a corrupt and unjust trial at the hands of corrupt leaders and to be crucified. And certainly no one dared to believe that Jesus was rising from the dead. An empty grave, a risen Jesus, this was not on anyone's radar. The resurrection of Jesus was the most significant moment in all of history. And yet John records that its revelation itself was humble and obscure. There weren't any crowds. There were no fanfares. No one of power or importance on hand. In fact, when you think about it, the resurrection of Jesus was not unlike the birth of Jesus. The setting was in a garden in the early hours, and the truth is revealed to but a few. In a garden, as if to right the foolishness of Adam and Eve when they were expelled from Eden for defying God. The grave is empty. And who was the first to witness this? It was revealed to Mary, who was esteemed by Jesus but not by society. The most important event of the Christian faith, the very heart of the gospel, the pinnacle moment of history, was revealed first to Mary. A woman. That's how much God esteems women and gives them authority to witness, testify, and preach the good news. A person, any personal tradition that says otherwise is just misguided. Mary, the first person to see the empty tomb, the first person to report it to the disciples, the first in history to have met the risen Christ, the first to hear her name uttered and to be told to go, "You are my messenger. Testify to what you have seen. The grave is empty. He is risen." Mary sees the empty grave and then gets Peter and the other disciple, John, and she initially assumes that someone had taken Jesus. Peter and John examine the scene, a bit of CSI investigation. Peter mostly grabs the linen and sees that it was placed and not folded. Placed and folded, it wasn't disturbed. In the Greek, there's two words that kind of capture what they saw. And when they saw, it actually is meant to describe that they were investigating, they were considering, they were mulling over, they were seeking to understand what the scene was all about. Friends, when we think about our faith, sometimes as Christians, we can be criticised for believing in a blind sense, to believing in this incredible act of Jesus because it happened because we believe. We do believe, but reason and rational thinking is actually a key part of faith. And John's account reinforces this. This was a historical reality unfolding before them. There was evidence to testify to the risen Jesus. They look at what they see, and they know that something isn't right, but they still don't fully understand. The grave is empty. Jesus appears to Mary. She doesn't recognize him. She calls him the gardener. And interestingly, she says to the gardener, "What have you done with the body?" Ironically, he had done something with the body. He transformed it, standing right in front of her. The gardener simply says, "Jesus, why are you crying?" Jesus says to Mary, "Why are you crying?" And he says her name, Mary. All at once he said her name, she recognizes him. The grave is empty. His body hasn't been taken. He is risen. In that moment for Mary, the revelation was clear. Mary sees, the disciples hear, and later see Jesus too, but still, what does it all mean? They're still yet to truly understand. For some friends in the world today, for some on the streets of Sydney in the interview during the Christ Files, we may struggle to believe. We see the empty grave, but do we see the risen Jesus? We see the empty grave, but do we see the risen Jesus? What does the resurrection actually mean to us today? What does it actually mean to us today? For me, the resurrection itself is grounded in the incarnation. Because apart from the incarnation of Jesus, of God himself, there is no resurrection. God sending Christ, being born to live as us, to be human and minister amongst us, is the foundation of the resurrection in many respects. To live resurrection life is to know the power of Jesus within and to become part of the world for others. To live incarnationally is resurrection life. To be selfless, to be humble, to be others focused, to enter the world of others and understanding them. To me, resurrection life also is not possible unless one first takes up the cross of Christ. Unless one first takes up the cross. Because apart from the cross, there is no resurrection. To live with Jesus, we must first die with Jesus. New life proceeds from death. New life proceeds and follows after death. This morning, friends, what do you need to put to death in your own life? What do you need to hand over, to let go of, to be able to follow Jesus wholeheartedly? Anyone who gains their life, anyone who wants to gain their life needs to lose it. Anyone who loses it will gain it. As the Father has sent me, Jesus says, I am sending you. A deep love for others, a life devoted to humble service. We don't live for ourselves, but for God. That is resurrection life. For the disciples and for us today, resurrection life means hope. It means hope. The whispers that whatever we're experiencing right now, there is more. There is more. Something new, life after despair. The light at the end of the proverbial tunnel. Jesus, is the light in the tunnel, believe it or not. For some of us, we're stuck in despair, the crisis perhaps and the loss of Friday. Today, if you feel discouraged, if you feel despair, resurrection life is hope in Jesus. For Mary, heading to the tomb, assuming one thing, assuming that her Saviour, her Lord, was dead, seeing the grave empty, but then all at once hearing the angel's message and seeing and experiencing the presence of Jesus, she was infused with hope, because hope is like oxygen to the soul. It's our air to our spiritual lungs. The grave is empty, he is risen. Resurrection is hope everlasting. Resurrection is freedom from the penalty of sin, which is death, from the lure of sin, the temptation, the bondage of sin, and the shame of sin. Resurrection life is freedom from the penalty of sin, the lure of sin, the bondage of sin, and the shame of sin. This morning, friends, what graves are we entombed in? For the Jews, in some respects, their misguided understanding of the law, their misguided actions and approach to Christ, the oppression from the empires and the class and the poverty that was rife in ancient society. That was some of the graves that people had to endure. For us today, what are our graves? What are our graves that entrap us? Whether it's lust, greed, selfishness, unforgiveness, judgment, guilt, shame, or pain. Jesus had conquered the grave. Why? So you can conquer yours. Jesus had conquered the grave so you can conquer yours. He had left the grave so that we can leave ours. It was once described to me, this idea of being entombed, as if we're in a prison cell. As if we're in a prison cell. And Christ, through his incredible sacrifice on the cross, has freed us by his forgiveness, and the door is open. The cell door is open. Resurrection life is when you choose to walk out. Is when you choose to walk out of the cell in complete freedom and fullness of new life. For some of us, we know the forgiveness of Jesus. We believe in that. The freedom for the cell to be opened up. We believe in that, but we still sit in the cell. We still sit in the cell. The gravestone is rolled away, yet we are still entombed. Resurrection means walk out. Resurrection means walk out. You're free to run. You're free to get up. You're free to go. Your chains have gone, we sing. We've been set free. Galatians 5:13. One of my favourite verses. For Christ has set you free, not for yourselves, but to serve others in love. Resurrection life means hope everlasting. It means freedom in the fullness of Jesus. Resurrection life means peace. It means peace. When you look at the back end of this account, after verse 18, it was verse 19, Jesus says to the disciples, peace be with you. The first things that he says to all of them gathered, the resurrected Christ, the first things that he says to all of them gathered is peace be with you. You're hiding, you're fearful of your own life from the Pharisees, you're wondering why the grave is empty, you're wondering what this is all about. Jesus says, peace be with you. He appears in the room suddenly and he says, shalom, this well-known Hebrew greeting, well-being in all its fullness. Shalom, the idea of peace be with you, the idea of shalom gathers up all the blessings of the kingdom of God. It is life at its best under the gracious hand of God. Jesus' use of that very first Easter evening represents the first truly authentic bestowal of shalom in the history of the world. Jesus had brought the kingdom of God into ultimate realization by his death and resurrection, living fully in the shalom of God. It is now wholly possible for each of us to live fully in the shalom of God. Peace be with you. For the disciples, the way is not obvious. The way is still dangerous, costly, and Jesus says, peace be with you. For some of us, the way may be uncertain. What we are facing may still fill us with fear. Jesus says, peace be with you. I'm going, but I'm giving you my spirit. I'm giving you resurrection life. Friends, fear can rob us of so much. Fear can rob us of so much. Jesus says, peace be with you. Death, where is your sting? The grave is empty. He is risen. Resurrection life is hope, freedom, and peace. I'm going to invite the musos to come. Friends, there are many moments in human history, none more important than the resurrection of Jesus. There is none more important than the resurrection of Jesus. The grave is empty. He is risen. The age of resurrection has come, and we're all living in it. We're all living in it. You're living in it. The real point, though, is not that we're living in the age of resurrection. The real point is it living in you? Is it living in you? Do you know the resurrection life of Jesus? This morning, friends, I invite you to put to death those things that blind and bind you. Put to death those things that blind and bind you. I invite you to walk out from your graves. May you know the hope, the freedom, and the peace that Jesus brings. For this is resurrection life. And if you know this resurrection life within, if you're walking in it and celebrating it today, may others see the resurrection life of Jesus living through you. When they look to you, may they see the fullness and the goodness of God in every way. The grave is empty. He is risen. May you know the risen Jesus within, and may we live the risen Jesus without today. That's resurrection life, the hope, the freedom, and the peace of God. Friends, we're going to pray, we're going to sing, and in these moments, I want to encourage you. Let's embrace the spirit of Mary. Somebody who got up earlier than anyone and raced to an empty grave. Actually, she raced to a grave. She didn't know it was empty. She raced to a grave to prepare a body that she couldn't get done earlier. She got up earlier than anyone to go and see the grave. In that same spirit, friends, I pray that we would embrace the faithfulness of Mary, the responsiveness of Mary, the enthusiasm of Mary, the desperation of Mary to go to where Jesus is. He is risen, so she discovered. He is risen and the grave is empty. We're going to have a chance to come and respond if you want to take up the opportunity. And there's a cross here. There's some notes that you can write on, some paper, some pens. And the idea is to just write something to thank God for. Maybe there's something you're hoping for in your life that you haven't realized yet. You need to pray to God, Lord, I'm hoping for this to happen. It hasn't happened yet. Please, Lord, I rely upon you. I need you. Help me. Maybe there's things in your life that you're looking for freedom from. Come and write it down and put it on the cross. Maybe there's things that you want to celebrate today, that you're walking in peace, and you just want to thank Jesus for the peace that he gives you. The cross is here if you want to come and kneel and pray and write something to put on the cross. Friends, I want to encourage you as well, if you feel motivated and courageous enough to pray with each other. We sit next to each other and we sing songs, but I want to encourage you to pray with each other in these moments, because believe it or not, we each need prayer, and we each need the prayer of one another. So the invitation's there as we're singing, as we're worshiping in these moments. Pray with one another if you feel led. And the way of prayer as well is always open if you just want to come and kneel. So however you feel led, whatever you want to do as we worship, as we sing, let's respond. Let's get caught up in seeking Jesus, hearing from Jesus, and following Jesus as we worship. I encourage you to come as we sing.